This is Philosophy versus Improv, where two sages try to teach each other a thing or two, and maybe you, the audience, get something out of it as well. I'm Mark Linsenmeyer, a philosophy babe magnet who's into learning improv.
And I am Bill Arnett, an improv gym rat, ready to dive into philosophy.
Each of us has come to this with a lesson in mind to convey to the other person. We've got two rules for the conversation. We're not going to say what the lesson is up front, and we're not going to take turns. When the lesson is done, we'll tell you what we learned. Our judge bot 5000 will decide which lesson produced the most profound effect.
Yes.
What's going, Bill?
I'm doing well. I've got my topic ready to go.
Well, why don't you start us off?
Well, great. Let's do some improv scenes, Mark. And I think we had someone comment that your improv has been getting better. They felt like your improv is improving. Do you feel like your improv is improving?
If somebody said it, then it must be true.
Are you enjoying it?
I'm definitely enjoying it. I wouldn't be here. I'm yes-anding the project.
Okay.
And our listeners, just by listening to this, you have yes-anded the project. You're in.
Yes. It's funny you say yes and. I say that precious little. Isn't that interesting? It's a whole concept that there are probably whole entire podcasts about that I have eschewed.
Yes. And yet, probably you believe something that is a translation of that, but more refined.
I bet that's a psychology thing as well. Let's dive in. Mark, I would love for you to start this thing and for us to be whatever you like. And I will follow your style and I'll follow my best to follow what you're feeling. All right.
Now, I've brought all of you here today because there's been some shenanigans.
Uh-oh.
And I think, Bob, why don't you just step up here?
Sure.
I had left some stuff in the break room fridge.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it had my name clearly on it.
Uh-huh.
Carmine.
Yeah.
I realized I write rather large, and sometimes it just comes out like as car when I put it on there. But I think there are not too many. I mean, there's Carbo there, but I think most of the employees would understand.
Carbo buys his lunch.
Exactly. Day. And yet, consistently, my sandwiches, my soup, my pickled herring, these things keep disappearing. And I'm pretty sure you're at the root of it.
I don't. Hey, look, if you're bringing pickled herring, maybe somebody's not eating it, but throwing it in the trash. I mean that stuff.
I can't say what has happened to the items. All that I know is that they are missing. And I have done a chart here. Here it is.
Ooh, okay.
So this has all 36 employees that are all in this room with us today.
Do you still want me standing up here? Can I sit down?
Yes, you got to stay up here.
Okay.
I mean, Carbo had to go early, but the 35 remaining employees plus Carbo, I've mapped out what days they were here versus when the things disappeared. And I've done this chart such that only you could have been the one who was here on all the days.
You got a lot of data. That's a lot of data points. Where do you think Carbo is from? Where do you think that name is from? Carbo. What do you think? Is that?
I guess he's Italian, so I guess I thought it was Carbo. Now, I don't want to say anything offensive about Italians. He's loaded, but that, we shouldn't make fun of the man's name.
Well, I'm not making fun. I'm curious. I'm nervous. I'm up here. You're presenting me with a lot of data that's going to be difficult to refute. I'm not going to lie.
Now, I understand. I see Tracy's name is right below yours, and they pretty much match up. But you know that she couldn't do such a thing. She is okay. She's left. I'm not sure why she just fled. Mm-hmm. She doesn't have the hand strength to pull out some of the things. When I have my monster hoagie, I think that rules her out.
I think of Tracy as handy capable. Okay. You've probably seen her in the copy room. It is amazing what she can do with her ability, with her different ability.
Thin wrists. I don't know if that's a protected class. She just has very thin wrists.
They're medically. We've talked about it. It's a condition, and I think we should just a round of applause for Tracy, everybody.
Oh, okay.
I really think
she's coming back. She's wearing like thick woolen things around her wrists. I'm really sorry, Miss, if I made you self-conscious about your wrists. There's nothing wrong with thin wrists. I was using it as an exculpatory feature to say that you are not the kind of person that I think unless you had some sort of sandwich wedging tool, some other device to carry extra heavy items that would be the perpetrator of the things that we're discussing here.
I would say she's not the kind of person who would steal your food because she's a good person. But I would think that if she believed that it would help others to steal your food, she would not be stopped by her very thin wrists and arms. That's what I believe. And I think this meeting is over. And I think we should all go back to our desks and get our work done for the day.
I feel like there should be some openness. I don't want to do these kind of things in a closed room. I don't want to be accused of some impropriety, of grabbing you or what. So I think we need to do this in front of everybody because, I mean, your sales are great. I gotta say, I would have just fired you for this. But I mean, when you go into one of those office managers and you pitch our particular really unusual product, it usually takes some explaining, but you're so good at that. In fact, why don't you just, I think maybe as a way of resolving this, I'm going to say just a warning on the lunch thing, but could you give an example to the other sales folks here of how you would pitch that most unusual office product?
Well, yeah. When people ask, do you really sell computer keyboards without an I? Well, let me just say this. I always say, yes, we do. And that is the product. And what is an I but an L, really, without the dot? And when you're typing, the I is in a funny place on the keyboard, and it's just more natural for people. Yeah, and again, you've probably tried to explain it, but here's my own special technique is I disrespect what they hold dear. Okay, that's what you do. You go in there, you find out what are the things that they claim as theirs, that they have ownership over at their business. Okay. We're great at making toothpaste tubes. We're great at making boxes. Okay. And then I disrespect it and push our eyeless keyboards onto them.
Can we, demonstrate this? Can we role play just a little bit just so we can really show the other sales associates? Hello, I'm Mr. Toothpaste, seller. I'm not so good at thinking of names. Toothpaste seller person Morgenstern.
Sure. Okay. Well,
yeah, like one of our big client, toothpaste seller Morgenstern. I think that you actually netted them, so then I don't even have to make up the name.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Toothpaste client Morgenstern. And let me just say, is this? You got a lot of great stuff on your desk here. Is this all yours? I'm just going to take it. I'm just going to take your little mug of pens. All right, this is mine now. Well,
I'm startled by your effrontery.
I'm startled.
Wait, what's wrong with that?
I have got something to show you. I have something to show you. And that is this. Not 101 key keyboard, a 100 key keyboard. A, less expensive. You're saving money. B, just as functional. All right.
So it leaves out the right bracket because I don't usually end my brackets.
Oh, it's got brackets, curly and straight. All right. Critical, important. What it's missing is the I key. All right. Now, before you go ahead and say what you're going to say.
Well, I mean, there is no I in team, so
yeah, and you see what I gets you? When we claim things with I, like you think this is your nameplate, it's mine now. I own this nameplate. Do you like that? Does that make you comfortable?
It does not make me comfortable.
Let's get rid of I.
Well, it's not in toothpaste. Would we say our toothpaste has a special Wootening formula? How would we bypass
how much
this?
of your budget is dedicated to keyboards? I'm guessing a sizable percentage. I've been in this game a long time.
Probably 45%
of your budget is keyboards.
Yeah, probably.
Not uncommon. How would you like to lower that budget?
That sounds really good. I think
get it down to 40. Imagine only spending 43% of your gross on keyboards. That's what I think would be a good idea.
All right, I'm sold. See, okay. That was wonderful,
Great.
Bob.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I think this whole lunch thing, we can just forget about that and get out there and make some sales. Let's go, team. Hands in.
Hey, you got barbecue sauce in your hand. End. And scene.
And fun.
All right. A scene within a scene. I was tempted to go a scene within a scene within a scene.
But double nest that thing. Well, it was enjoyable. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I think so. I put you on the spot there. In improv products that I've listened to where they often involves a list of some sort or, and I feel like I would be very bad at that, but at least making you think of this one product. And you definitely came through with something that was serviceable. It was good. It was enjoyable.
There's a big thing in the improv world. Don't ask questions. You put the onus on someone else. Don't make the people jump through hoops. It's sometimes people will use the word pimping to mean making someone do something. Oh, sing that song you always sing. Hey, do that dance you always do. And, it's enjoyable. And I think the audience gets it. They understand that this thing is improvised and this person is being put on the spot. Ha, 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 ha. So in some ways, it's attractive to do in a show. It's attractive to do in a scene. But the standard theory is that it puts your partner, as you acknowledged, in a difficult spot. I'm going to say this, Mark. I like making things up.
I would hope so.
I enjoy creating. And when you ask me a question, you don't put me on the spot. You give me the ball, and now I get to run with it and go score a touchdown. That's what I'm trying to say.
Now, are you concerned that when someone does something like that to you, that is there an element of fishing? Like, hopefully one would actually pass you the ball, actually give you the chance to run with it. Clearly, once you said the I thing, I was fishing for there is no I in team. I thought that was the obvious thing, such that I had to just eventually say it myself. But what is the protocol for, I've given you the ball, it is now yours to play with until you hand it back?
Well, one piece of this is people listening at home, they are listening to Bob and Mr. Jenkins, whoever you were in that scene, Carmine. They're listening to Bob and Carmine, but they're also listening to Bill and Mark. And if they have a history with us, then they know the kinds of choices that you might make, the kind of choices that I might make. And they are either rooting on or cheering or laughing or enjoying both the actors and the characters that are being portrayed. And that's a kind of a funny thing that happens sometimes. You go watch a movie with a star. Sometimes there's some indie movies who don't want to put a recognizable face in their movies simply because they don't want the audience going, hey, I love that actor. They're fantastic. So in that regard, there's a lot going on. I've forgotten your question. But
I hope that there are listeners that have picked one of us as the GOAT and that are like,
fair enough.
I'm a big fan of that Bill, but that Mark, he's just annoying. He reads all those commercials and are rooting for you, or vice versa.
Sure.
I don't know that we're doing anything, despite the logo, which shows the improviser as a rather demonic character, which I did not draw, but I approved.
That's fine.
I don't think we're doing anything to set those particular roles.
Is it difficult when you get pimped to make into a list or something? It is frightening, but it is in some ways, but it's rewarding when you get used to it and can do it. And when you realize that it doesn't matter what you say. I have two general options. A, I can swing for the fences and do something ridiculous. We sell keyboards with no I key. That would be an example. B, I can go really, really safe. We sell shower curtain rings. I'll go very mundane or very ridiculous. Either one of them can work because it's not the idea that makes it funny. It's how we support that idea and how we play that idea. Whatever I am selling that we've agreed upon is somewhat ridiculous. My logic will be stupid. And it is the logic of morons that fuels improvisation. The audience wants moron logic. They want to hear people's stupid ideas and that they believe, or are trying to convince the other person to believe. And asking me a question about what we sell is a doorway to get some moron logic. And while it may be a little trepidatious, I know that there be gold in them there are hills.
This may point to a way that my approach to philosophy is different than a lot of people's, because I appreciate moron logic and the fact that there has to be some kind of logic to it. Right? It can't simply be random absurdity. Like, that would be a move.
Sure.
But if it just keeps being more and more random absurdity, well, at least the pieces, the mind will draw links between the pieces of apparent nonsense so that there ends up being a certain kind of logic in the way things progress. It's just not in the way of scholarly logic, something that is one definite answer. There's a more creative, open-ended aspect to it.
I would agree. And I'd say sometimes in improv, your stab may be illogical and ridiculous intentionally, knowing that you then have the rest of the scene to build logic around that illogical stab.
So have you thought about those kind of, I want to put logic in quotes, but logical patterns between, any kind of what constitutes a legitimate reaction to something, right? As opposed to a mere coincidence, right? If I say something and you've already determined before we even come in what your lesson is going to be, what you're going to say, then that's not an interaction at all. But insofar as there are an interaction, then there are, of course, like I was saying, an open-ended creative number of responses, but there's a definite sort of finite directionality. And it seems like what we're learning here with improv is just like in chess. You think when you don't know how to play chess, and I'm not a good chess player, but I know enough. I've watched the TV shows. I know enough to know that there are particular strategies. And because there are only so many pieces, they're like, okay, you're doing this opening. Well, there are only, a few different opening strategies that are going to be good at all. And you're doing this one.
Part of something that's difficult is there are many improvisers who don't necessarily want to jump in the pool or don't necessarily want to make a choice unless they already understand what that choice means, or they fear making a choice that they don't understand what it means, rather than making a choice and then listening to that choice that they themselves have already made. It's that backwards justifying that improv is very, very good at. And in fact, you're able to do. And if you're writing a book or something, it's going to be logical. And when you're thinking of ideas, your idea may come with the logic intact. And you might reject an idea unless you want to be crazy and I'm just going to throw my characters a curveball that I don't even understand and let them sort it out. Authors can certainly write that way, and that certainly happens. But it's probably seen as a lesser, not lesser, but as a more wild technique. In improv, we're doing it all the time. It takes 2 points to make a line. And you may think with your first line, in fact, I think we did one several weeks ago where I intentionally tried to put a point out in space after your initial point that would form a line that you never would have guessed. I wish I could remember that scene now. It was a while ago. But it's just the idea that when you go in and you say your first line, oh, great, now we're using line geometrically and as a metaphor. Yes. When you receive your first independent clause of dialogue, your first collection of dialogue, you can't turn off your brain. You're already assuming what it means and where the scene is going to be going. But until I add that second data point, my own independent clause, both of which those together form a line, then we can have something. So to your question, has an action even happened if there's no reaction? I guess we could say, can a scene even exist if I'm not reacting to what you're doing?
So maybe we should try another scene or exercise to briefly illustrate this in just as transparent a way as possible. Not I'm going to ignore what you say. I mean, I do that in plenty of scenes. We don't need to demonstrate that. We did something that we released only for the supporters where we recorded some phrases that were potentially going to be something that we work into our the trailer. So maybe do something like that. And some of those, it actually turned out that we were kind of reacting to each other in a loose way some of the time, because that's just a natural way to think. But let's see if there's any logic. Give me a phrase. We're now entering the scene in quote zone, the exercise zone. Throw the ball to me and I'll try to throw it back. And we'll do this several times and just kind of stop and look at what sort of logic was at play there.
All right. So we're trying to make some kind of pattern, see if a pattern emerges.
Yeah. So we're not talking about like just a word. This is not a word association game. This is a line.
Look, Dennis, I saw your girlfriend kissing Derek.
My girlfriend is Derek.
Okay. So, or you just find out about this too? Wait a minute. Are we doing this right, Mark? Are we doing this right?
It's ambiguous. Are we actually having a conversation or are we doing an exercise? And you can interpret it either way. I think that I was taking it in the more abstract sense.
Now, I will say this. Your line, some people don't like it when people do really weird, confusing things in improv. And it's because it makes them question their prior choices and assumptions. Well, guess what? Maybe you shouldn't have been making those prior choices and assumptions. And if there's any improvisers out there and someone says something weird or confusing, kind of like you were attempting to do, Mark, it's okay for your character to be confused and not understand. That's my little nugget for anyone aspiring to improvise. You are allowed to not understand what's going on in character. Both actor and character are allowed to not fully understand what's going on.
All right. So let's try that one more time without being characters. We're just talking about the logic of the individual utterances. You could be this could be super short form improv.
And you would like me to respond to what you say to try to encapsulate it logically?
Whether respond or just give a reacting sentence. It's not necessarily like a character is hearing the sentence and saying something else, but just that we're throwing the ball around.
You got it. I'm going to have to buy a minivan. All right, the family's growing. I got to buy a minivan.
If the family grows too much, a minivan will not be enough.
I never thought I'd ever say this, but we've got plenty of bookmarks. We've got enough bookmarks.
Not enough bookmarks to fill a minivan.
I've decided I'm going to have that procedure, that special procedure.
You never have too many procedures.
Look, the neighbor's cat is dead on our roof.
Better get the minivan. All right, let's
okay, there we are. All right. Is that what you had in mind?
I wasn't sure. So I guess the thing I've been trying to get at is whether there is, have you heard the term dialectics?
Yes.
What do you think that is?
I have heard that it is point, counterpoint, resolution, that somehow between these 2 points that there may actually be some agreement to be sussed out. Huh?
Yes.
I knew somebody who was obsessed with it.
The general description of that, which was used all the way back to the ancient Greeks, is just having an argument, having a conversation.
Sure.
But the sort of famous way that this has been used is by Hegel, who sort of is, these weren't even actually his terms, but thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which is what you're talking about, that somebody says something and then somebody else doesn't have to be just saying. The whole idea is that this is a structure that you can see, say, in the progress of art. So like, we had the uptight, or in culture. So we had the uptight 50s, and then we had the loosey-goosey freedom 60s. But then the 70s somehow was a reaction to the 60s, and by the time we got to the 80s, then we had some, but always the response to the response retains something from both from what it's responding to, because obviously, even if you're saying the opposite of something, you're sort of within the same framework as it, but it is echoing sort of what was two steps before. Every step kind of encompasses
building on the prior thing. It may in some ways reject aspects of the prior thing, but it is not denying the prior thing. It is not reactionary. It is evolutionary.
Yeah. So while we were playing a very loose game such that it wasn't the case that, I wasn't just trying to negate what you just said.
Not at all.
Right. You weren't saying, I saw your girlfriend kissing whatever. And I said, no. Like that would just be the opposite. But no, there's a range of things that can be, you could twist things around, you can counterpoint, but a finite range of things semantically that you could do to respond to that. And then, so I was trying to see whether this might be just an exercise that we could come back to at some point. So my sort of third response was incorporating, because humor, of course, naturally includes callbacks. So when we're doing something random like this, if you're bringing up the van, I say something about the van, you go to somewhere else. Okay, my next response might also involve the van.
Yes.
So what was your thought in the move where you brought up the never have too many procedures? Then you said something about the cat being dead. Can you say what?
I was intentionally trying to move away, actually, from anything that we were doing. Now, you could certainly make a link that procedure, hinting at something medical, we're getting to dead cat. But I was actually intentionally trying to push the boundaries a little bit. I'm going to say this. There's a lot in the classic improv world of there are no mistakes. Nothing you say is wrong. And in fact, I would agree that we can find any two random lines of dialogue from two different books and make them the first and second lines of our scene. And I bet we can make that work and not even sweat over it. I think there's probably an elegant solution to it. Some people hear that there's no mistakes and are like, oh, great. No one will laugh at me. I have permission to fail. But I would rather people hear that there's no mistakes and instead say, good. Let's push the boundaries. If there's no improv police, let's go rob a bank. If that distinction makes sense. I'm serious. We could get random lines, random words, and any 2 points can make a geometric line, which is a metaphor for the scene, that there is a logic that can hold any 2 points together. It may be strange. It may be weird. It's not even that one person is crazy. In fact, someone straight up saying no to me is probably the easiest. Me saying, hey, I saw your girlfriend kissing Derek. No, you didn't. That was an illusion. That's actually an easier thing for me to play with than I saw your girlfriend kissing Derek. 'Twas the night before Christmas and all through the house. That might be a more difficult thing other than just making you crazy, which is always an option. Maybe not one you always want to exercise. You're in denial, a personal denial, of what happened. Your significant other is being unfaithful.
The trajectory of what counts as a response. When we started the exercise the first time, I saw your girlfriend kissing Derek, and I said, Derek is my girlfriend. That was clearly, linguistically, a pretty elementary, but interpreted, you were still playing I'm a character, and I'm saying this to an actual other character. That makes no sense that they would respond in that way. The logical response to that is to not understand that we were sort of playing that what counts as a legitimate logical move of course, depends on the context, depends on what language game you think you're playing.
Sure. In an improv scene, it all counts. And I think believing that really opens people's improv up a little bit. And not worrying about pre-clearing their lines or presupposing how the other person will accept or take their lines, but just saying them. The other part is that there is an insidious thing at work, and perhaps the medical procedure did lead to the dead cat, and perhaps we did get back to minivan. You could climb on a minivan to get on the roof. That never goes away. That doesn't turn off. That doesn't magically disappear. And the people who see improv from a more artistic bent will latch onto those things and say, we can count on that happening. We can dive into something and not pay attention to what we're doing, do 3 or 4 scenes in a row. There will always be a line that connects them. Always. And all we have to do is draw it. And it will always be there. I just do an exercise where we can name any 3 movies, random movies we know we've seen, and decide what the theme is that connects those movies. It's never failed. I'll say that. I've probably done it 25, 30 times, and I've never been able to get 3 random movies and not draw a thematic line through them.
Well, especially if you're monomaniacal about your hoagies, say, and then you can just find the hoagie in every single movie and say, look at those 3 things are connected by being hoagie adjacent. This, in its very denial of hoagies, is expressing something very strong about hoagies.
I would hope that the theme is deeper than simply an object appearing in all 3 things. One would hope.
Turner and hoagie. There's that one.
Yeah.
The unbearable lightness of the absence of hoagies.
But maybe we can play that game in future weeks.
The thing with the cat on the roof thing, so I didn't recognize that as a dialectical response. But because you then explained it afterwards that, it was a move in the game, but the move was instead of, a straightforward response, I'm going to turn it to a different channel. And that itself is an irrelevancy is a response. And you might ask, how irrelevant is the irrelevancy? And you could always chart these lines between them like you're talking about. So what do you think I was getting at in bringing up? I obviously didn't do it till the end, and I'll be straight with you. I didn't decide on what the topic was until we were well into it, because the topic I came in with, there was no opportunity to bring it up. So I'll just save it for another time. Can you tell me what you got out of this discussion of dialectic that might be the thing I have in mind?
I wouldn't have known if you didn't bring it up. And that's also true in improv a lot, that so many of the cracks and creaks and paint, the audience never sees. I would say this, though, that somehow that there's a tacit agreement between the players that has to be reached if we're going to have a scene, we're going to have something grow. And that in philosophy or whatnot, ultimately one would hope to arrive at, even though we may come at it from different angles and from different points of view, that there is a shared commonality. That's my guess.
I think that's a great lesson, and it is dialectically related to what we're talking about. The actual thing that I had in mind that I probably would have just said outright if we had kept going a little longer, but I was looking at the clock, is that a lot of these things that really it's only Hegel, but then Marx following Hegel, and these things that people see as inevitable historical reactions are, as you say, post hoc rationalizations. Right? You look at the way history actually did occur, or the way it's very clear to me in artistic movements where you can be like, oh, there was prog, and then there was punk reacting to prog, and then there was post-punk that incorporated some prog. But those are, you're picking and choosing among, who you think are the exemplars of music, rock and roll during those periods. Obviously, there was plenty of root stuff sort of going throughout there. There was, all these things that don't fit your particular pattern. And the fact that you can point to that, I mean, even like the uptight 50s to the loose 60s, like that is just a cliche.
Sure.
And doesn't really capture, in any detail what was going on at all. They're just these historical narratives that we've given ourselves. So I wanted to say that this dialectical thinking is a useful way to make sense of things, but it's always kind of bullshitty.
I'd buy that. We're limited by our own knowledge. As our knowledge changes, our understanding changes. Anytime we start working in absolutes, it's like, well, if this is a math problem, we'll have absolutes all day long. But once we start leaving that, maybe it's best to grain of salt these things. I'd agree. What do you think I was going for? You're going to have to go all the way back to the beginning 42 minutes ago, if you can.
This is difficult because, as often happens in the philosophy discussions where you bring up something that I didn't have in mind and we actually do chase that for a while and have a good discussion of it. then whatever started might be lost.
Where'd this begin?
We had a lot of good improv stuff. I mean, you began it. You were going to go with my style, that you can let somebody be the person who is setting the tone, who is setting the type of humor, who is setting the setting. So is that it? That's
right on the nose. That's right on the nose. And I think it's hard for people, you talk about musical genres a lot. It's hard for people to see the genres in improv. And it's like, great. I know Mark likes to tack absurd. There's always some absurdity going on. And I think that's great. That's fantastic. It's not a judgment. However, sometimes when I play with you, Mark, I might feel my own gut instinct might be to treat that absurdity as too absurd and be frustrated by your absurdity. But this time it's like, no, we're going to dive in and live in this absurd world together. And that is a style choice. How do we want this scene to sound? Even within any musical genre, there's countless subgenres and sub-subgenres, and they're all right. They're all good. They're all fine. And hopefully all the musicians are playing in that style together.
Well, and of course, by this point, you have so melded my improv brain into your desired mold.
Well, in fact, when you started that scene as like a problem in the break room, I was like, well, great, crap. I really wanted Mark to, it's like,
that's just what came over immediately. Whereas I should have picked something that had something to do with my,
let's go back to being turkeys.
Actually, there was something about evidence that was going to be in my original philosophy lessons. So that's partly why of like, we're going to discover and I didn't know if it was a murder or something until it started coming out of my mouth, but the evidence behind a theft, but then it got it went different directions.
The reality of the moment, the scene's going to be what it wants to be, and we're both responsible for it. And sometimes people call it playwriting, to try to jam the scene into a certain box. And it's like the best scenes are the ones that follow their own natural path. And that scene definitely followed its path, and it was fun to do.
One thing that's started to come out of that I enjoyed, that could be maybe it's just the humor of the TV show The Office in its various iterations is the boss who's trying to talk about something else, but ends up making all sorts of politically incorrect, even in the attempt to be very politically correct, is just making constant faux pas. And that's just something that everybody can relate to at this point. I'm not sure exactly where the just having really narrow wrists thing came from. I don't know. That was something that we definitely could have run with, but it just seemed like standing up there accusing you of something needed to resolve in some way.
Yeah. And of course, I can seize upon any crack or any time you put your foot even near your mouth. My character can seize on that in an effort to manipulate you to feel guilty, so you'll let me go from my crimes. Welcome to life.
Do you think that would have been more coherent than let me start praising your sales ability and we're going to do a scene within a scene? That was the sort of not really prompted by anything that I was getting a little bored with what was going on.
I would much rather talk about my sales ability than this theft, which I clearly was guilty of. I want to steer this thing away. I hope that came across in my portrayal, that any opportunity to not talk about stealing stuff, then my guy's going to jump on with both feet. That was my thinking. I was like, phew, my character's thinking on that.
So what would have been a funnier closing line than you have barbecue on your hands? What would be a better bit of evidence that I could have used as a callback to actually show that you were in fact guilty? Can we brainstorm for a second?
I reject the very notion that anything could have been funnier or better, and that the scene is the scene is the scene, and it is what it is, and it's a beautiful, special thing. How could you improve your child? Maybe get them a better job. But yes, that might be a little philosophical, improv philosophical. There are any number of things. It might be nice if this was a sketch we were going to write for the evidence. Now, you did pick up on my sales technique was essentially me stealing things from their refrigerator, metaphorically. Yes, me disrespecting their objects.
Yes, no, that was a really good connection.
And you could certainly seize on that or recognize that or not recognize it. And there may be even maybe me getting away with it is funny, but something that you could see or whatnot. Chances are the answer is back inside the scene somewhere. And if we were to read it back over and see some things and be, oh, well, wait a minute, think about your name being too long or your name being misspelled. There was some fun name stuff in there, and maybe that's something.
All right. Well, I guess as a final improv topic, this is very much related to what's going on because the judge bot has spit out the response, which I see that improv had the more profound effect. Obviously, come on.
You nailed it. You nailed it hardcore. What I was going for.
I at least remembered that one thing you said.
Okay.
Let me put it that way. Not that it necessarily that was the point that changed
impact
my life.
Okay.
But I remembered it at least. But what is the protocol for dealing with characters? Is there a protocol there are only two of us? I had a giant room full of people. I didn't know what to do with Tracy, so she just left. So I never know whether to, should we start doing voices? Should we we need to have some excuse why they're not joining the conversation.
Yeah, there's multiple techniques. One is they say things that the audience doesn't hear. And I mean, Tracy, that I was being facetious, right? Well, okay. All right. Okay. She's angry. She's really mad, and we can kind of work around not ever hearing her, or we never do hear her and she storms off or is angry or is in the back of the room being angry and staring daggers at us. Anything we can do that acknowledges that she either is choosing not to speak because what we did affected her and pushed her to not speak, or she is speaking and we can hear it and perhaps the audience can't.
And then we have Erica record that line later.
There we go.
And put it in.
Fix it in post.
That would be so surprising.
Fix it in post.
I don't know that I have the energy to do that, but perhaps someday. All right. Well, this was fun. I enjoyed learning from you today, Bill.
I enjoyed learning from you today, Mark.
And scene. Nailed it.
That was the best one we've ever done.
You think so?
The best show closing.
Okay. All right, so that was the closing music, and you would think that this would be over, but yet you can probably see there's several more minutes on your listening device to this episode, and that's because I, out of the generosity of my heart, out of the mercantile instinct, am going to expose to you what is normally just for the behind the paywall people, which is our post game. Which is, I will freely admit, no big whoop. It has some recommendations. It has some further discussion of whatever we might have talked about in the show, maybe. Some behind the scenes kind of stuff. And as we are getting guests on many of our episodes here ahead, we will be talking with them a little more, provided that they can stick around. So you can decide for yourself, but I think you're going to see that this is worth your time, that this is the full experience of the show. And you want to get that, which means signing up to be a supporter. You could do that in two ways. There is a Patreon page, patreon.com/philosophyimprov, or you can sign up directly through the Apple Podcasts app. There should be a subscribe button. Either way, you're helping this show continue to be made, and you won't have to listen to commercials anymore or to me asking you for money like this. This is the post game. I think we have at least two people that have signed up.
Hey, very good. I got a very positive response from an improv person, an anonymous improv person on one of the postings on an improv site. I was very happy to read, and they just said that they're really enjoying it, and they emphasized really with italics. So let's hope it's not sarcasm. There was
really enjoying it.
There was no /s on the end or whatever the sarcasm.
Yeah, it seems like you'd have to. It's hard for me to vocally italicize only the really and not also the enjoying. Like if you're going to be snotty, it seems like it's the whole sentence.
You'd really want to dig in. Yeah. And really jack up the sarcasm. Yeah. Yeah. If you're speaking it.
I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah. That doesn't really play. Doesn't really work.
So many possibilities for future improv topics about inflecting words.
It's funny because I know we talked about the Revolutions podcast. And when you mentioned Hegel and Marx, that was the current Russian Revolution. That's the roots of it, So it was like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that stuff and how societies move from feudal to pre-capitalist to market to, or mercantile to capitalist to socialist per theory.
That's the great history changing example of how, yeah, you can trace these things in the past, but you cannot project them forward.
Or try
doesn't make any sense.
Or try to force them to happen. Well, that's the theory. We got to make sure it happens. I know there's that, what's his name? One of those rando Trump people, Bannon, who is a big fan apparently of the turning points theory or the apex points. There's a name for it, but it's like a lot, the world is going around, going, hunky dory. And then every 25 years, there's an inflection point. And you can look back at history and with that model and pick your points and make it work. But his whole thing is like, and we're at an inflection point right now. Now is another inflection point. So we get to choose what this next world is going to be like. And again, it's taking that theory and just as you said, projecting it forward or trying to jam it onto the future just to satisfy some not real human imagined theory.
Right. And there's always a tension in the sort of historically based thinking between it's going to happen anyway and we have to make it happen. That those shouldn't, it should just be descriptive theory. It should just be, because really, whether you, Steve Bannon as a writer or Karl Marx as a writer or whatever, you're not going to have that effect. No matter how many people you reach, your words, if there's really this inevitable historical progression, and, you can chart those in terms of incredible advances in civil rights. And then, of course, there's going to be reaction. So, of course, after we have a black president, you're going to have a huge counter reaction to that. And they did something fucking insane. So now, there's a reaction against that. And, that is entirely predictable, but it seems like there's very little you could do.
That's just human. That's humanity. That's just human nature.
Yes, there's very little you could do to change that. You could try to soften it, but
I'm now going to predict. I'm going to predict the future for anyone listening at home. For you and anyone listening at home, you or anyone very close to you, someone within your circle of friends or family, will have a medical emergency in the next 5 years. Yeah. Would you like another one?
I'll send you my $500 right now for that week.
There is a high schooler in America right now involved in a love triangle. Yes, probably. Honestly, probably. I think that's a safe bet. I mean, how many tens of millions of high schoolers are there? There's probably about 10 million high schoolers in America. There really are probably about 10 million high schoolers. The chances that one of them has an I in their name and is involved in some kind of romantic, I'd say that. I'd bet it. I'd bet on it. Speaking of high schoolers, my art recommendation for today. I don't know if anyone is, I may be a little late to the boat here, but a TV show on Hulu called, it's spelled Pen 15, PEN 15. It's might be penis, secretly in computer leet speak, but it's really funny. Cringe humor, if you like cringe humor, coming of age cringe humor.
That is a great recommendation. I should have come in with something.
That is fine. You can just bank it.
You know what? I'll just sort of ask you. So have you watched the it's getting a lot of buzz right now, the White Lotus. Are you familiar with that show? I
enjoyed some of the characters. Have you seen it?
Yes, I've seen it all the way through.
I've not seen it all the way through.
I think it's a legitimate recommend from me. But what was your impression given the first? Did it turn you off?
There were aspects of it that I didn't like. There are aspects of it that I really, really liked. How about that?
The music thinks that it's much more exciting than it is. Right from the first episode. It's so, it's kind of a little boring. They're quirky. There's a lot of great performers doing quirky things and you can roll your eyes at them.
I'm fine with that.
But then there's, the music knows that foul deeds are going to happen. And if anything, it didn't get as messed up as I expected it to. I expected Ozark level or, Breaking Bad level zaniness. And it didn't get to that point. And strangely enough, it's set up to get you to sympathize with these awful people by the end, which is what you'd expect from a drama, but not necessarily from a mind-twisting cringe comedy, something that's going to have some ultra violence in it somewhere, as the music would indicate.
Yeah.
So
I'd buy that.
Push ahead. And it may well have, it could just be a completely isolated thing, but I saw something about a season 2, which if it does, it'll just be like Fantasy Island, that there are no characters. It's just all different cast because it's just one of these, it's an environment where crazy things can happen.
Yeah. There were my biggest complaints were there were a few things that kind of were taste complaints. And I own my taste complaints. I do love cringe things. I do love slice of life. I do love weird characters. It should have ticked every box. But there's just a few moments, spoilers that I was like, I wouldn't have made that choice.
That's the spoiler. That does not constitute a spoiler. The fact there's something in this that might make you go, that's not a spoiler.
Yeah. There were just a few I wouldn't have made that choice moments. And that kind of takes me out of it. That'll take someone out of it. Absurdity can only exist in reality. And sometimes when people get too weird or too absurd, we leave some reality lying around that I need it picked up and talked about.
That's a good, it's a line which I'm very familiar with and think a lot about with regard to various comedies and things of how absurd that it can be. And then does it expect to make you feel later, like about these characters, that this show, clearly White Lotus, is some sort of drama ultimately, even though it has comedy. And so, yes, you are supposed to feel things, whereas there are like some wacky comedies that if they make that left turn, I'm just like, this is totally unearned. You have created a pattern of absurdity. Why would you think that I would now be emotionally invested in it all of a sudden?
I'd say I enjoyed the writing more than I enjoyed the direction. How about that?
An example that comes most readily to mind is there's that sitcom Just Shoot Me. You remember that? It was pretty minor. Mm-hmm. It had David Spade in it. That was kind of the only reason that I started watching it. Mm-hmm. And it was a pretty mediocre show. But some funny performers in it, some good lines here and there. It's nice light entertainment. But by the time they got to its series finale, every show when it wraps up, they have to have this emotional thing because for these actors, all these people on the set, it's been 5-10 years of their lives that they've been living together. But do not expect me, the audience, to give a shit about your tearful goodbyes. You have not earned that with this show. You're not even
That's
friends.
A little gross. Please have that party. Don't broadcast it to America. Yeah. Yeah.
Charge a premium. Make the subscribers.
Get it's something you can download later for that. But let's not make that. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Great connecting with you. And we can announce to our supporters that we're going to have some guests pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be exciting to have them.
Let's say goodbye to them, and then we'll talk about that for a minute.
You got it.
Offline. So long, supporters.
Thank you.
I should sell my soul. Bankrupt.